Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
Darkcast Network. Come to the dark side of podcasts. We have cookies.
Cookies? Me love cookies.
Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. I'm CJ, host of Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBT. My episodes focus on crimes committed by and against the LGBTQ community. I've covered cases you probably have heard of, such as Matthew Shepard, Brandon Tina, and the Orlando Pulse nightclub massacre, as well as some lesser-known cases like the murder of Ray Hainish, the Australian gay beat murders, and the suspicious disappearance of Lisa Lynn Stone. I cover cases brought to me by listeners like Penny Brummer, who I believe was wrongfully convicted, taboo cases such as lesbian corrective rape and murder in South Africa, and Pray the Gay Away camps. I discuss gay serial killers, women who pretend to be men to hook up with other women, and trans murders. I'm opinionated and uncensored. I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but surely I'm someone's shot at tequila. No matter what your gender or orientation in life might be, please join me as I tackle rainbow crimes in search of unicorn justice. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck. Hey, y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
And we want to give a big shout out to Rachel, our newest Patreon supporter. Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone who joins us at patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. It is because of folks like you we are able to keep this podcast going.
It's because of people like Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. You are fully responsible for today's episode.
She is... I've already signed the disclaimer. She's responsible for all my actions and words.
We'll be forwarding an NDA to you.
That's right.
Just kidding. I'm not P. Diddy.
Rachel made me do it.
We don't have no NDAs up in here.
I already got the T-shirts made.
We're way too honest to have any kind of like NDAs. You know that?
Well, it's also...
We just be telling on ourselves.
It's a lot of paperwork. You know, you got
to keep track of that.
You got to bring in lawyers. You got to have like one of those folders, those accordion folders or whatever.
Oh, man, I can't even keep track of my birth certificate. I'm not going to be able to handle legal documents.
I'm like, I don't remember if you were supposed to say that or not.
Anywho, how are you, Dylan?
I'm doing pretty good.
You are pretty good, huh?
Yep. How are you?
Jazzy.
Yeah, I feel special today.
See, I got my jazz hands out right now.
Oh, my gosh.
They've been typing away all day.
I know.
I'm getting to an age where my carpal tunnel is preventing me from having the best jazz hands. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, you got some old... crusty hands.
What? Not you, bud.
My hands aren't crusty. They're pretty clean right now.
Beg to differ.
All right, so here we are in the Mountain Murder studio. Gosh, I can't even wrap my head around the story Heather has for us today.
Okay. Before we get started with this case, Dylan, we have to go over a few things.
This is a real trigger warning.
This is a real fucked up case. I don't know how else to describe it. If you have issues with things like incest, sexual abuse, suicidal ideations, cult-like elements,
okay,
physical abuse, domestic violence. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Basically, imagine all the fucked up things you can in the whole world, and it's probably in the story. So if any of that bothers you, you should just skip this episode because it's chock full of bizarre, horrific things.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Maybe I might set this episode out.
I'm telling you, Dylan, of all the stories we've covered in 6 years, there have been like a handful that really stick out for me.
Right.
That I still like kind of linger in my brain and set up shop, disturb me on like a cold, dark night. This is definitely one of those cases that I will never forget.
Oh my gosh.
I debated whether we should even talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah, I know you've wrestled with that all week.
Because it's disturbing. But I have, through my research, realized it's a story that has not been told very much on podcasts. I think there's maybe one other pod that has covered this. It's one I don't listen to, of course. So, there's not a lot of information out there as far as, true crime coverage. One of my resources today was a TV show called Evil Kin. It was like a TV episode of Evil Kin, which is on the Discovery Channel. And there's a book, which I'll mention here in a moment, as a resource. But let me just say, what is it? Okay. With these true crime TV shows, these like little 30-minute, very digestible little true crime tidbits, they're so wrong.
You've noticed this.
The facts are never correct. And they tell these bizarre, like they'll tell this account of the story that's completely inaccurate and distorts the reality of what happened. And I don't understand because I'm like, most of these cases are truly disturbing.
Right.
So why do you feel the need to exaggerate details or add things that didn't happen?
But it's like they exaggerate dumb details as well. It's like somebody just wrote it up and no one else like fact checked the little script,
Yeah.
It's very strange. And like you said, this is all public information. So and I understand sometimes, not leaving someone's name out or, exactly their home address or something like that. Obviously, you don't want to divulge that information, even if it is public, there could be some liability or something. But you've pointed this out more than once to me in these little 30-minute tidbit shows that they change dumb shit for one thing, and then they don't recount the full story.
It's just completely, there's all these like inaccuracies that completely paint a different picture of what actually happened, and I don't understand what's the point in that.
That seems more odd to me than, just telling the real story.
Well, yeah, so when we have a lot of discussions about ethics and true crime, and I think that's something that should be brought up. And it's not always the podcast side. It's these little TV shows.
And there's a million of them.
Oh, yeah. And I can always find so many discrepancies in the storylines. So, yeah, Evil Kin episode on this subject. And also, I read a book called House of Secrets by Lowell Cauffill. And that was my main resource today, along with many, many newspaper articles from the 1990s.
And some soul searching.
Dylan, are you ready?
I am ready.
Now,
let's go.
With all of that being said and done, let's get into today's case. It is a doozy, as we say in the Mountain Murder Studio.
Oh, my God.
1849 Caroline Street in Stark County, Ohio, was a house of horrors. An attorney named Rick Tirana would call the Sextons, who resided at this residence, quote, the most dysfunctional family in America. The social services agency in Stark County had received dozens of referrals over the course of 13 years, but without any disclosures from the 12 Sexton children, little could be done. And yes, I said 12 children.
12 children?
The Sexton family, there were 12 children.
I just can't even wrap my head around that.
There
honestly.
was basically, Ed and May Sexton had a child every year.
So as soon as she pops one out, she heals up, nature resets, she's popping another one
I
out.
like how you say she heals up. Like, what is she, like an open wound or something?
Hey, you know what?
She scabs over and then she's good to go.
It's a lot. Childbirth's a hard thing to watch.
To watch. Spoken like a true man.
No, but I'm just saying it's a lot. It's hard on the woman's body. It is. I mean, come on. You got this little alien in there sucking all your life force out. And it's a beautiful thing and all that.
It is?
Yeah. And then then boom, here's a kid. And I don't think, do you think it's healthy for a woman to have a kid back to back to back like 12 times? I mean,
I'm no OBGYN. I have no idea.
you're not?
I'm not. I know, as shocking as that is, because I'm so smart and intelligent and beautiful and all.
You know about women
successful.
too.
Yes. I'm not sure, Dylan, but it does seem to me that would be a lot of wear and tear on your body just physically.
Right.
And I don't know.
She'll be on the lot later, on the used lot.
Maybe
Somebody's
maybe
kicking the
it's
tires.
What nature intended. I
Talking
have
about
no
you-
idea. But Dylan, I mean, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, really, women were birthing babies at high rates like this. I mean, it was not uncommon for families to have 10, 12, 15 kids.
Right.
Somebody had to work the farm.
Well, yeah, and that's how, I don't know. I just couldn't imagine being...
I don't want to have 12 babies. I can tell you that.
But look, well, that's one of those situations where all the older kids help. Everybody pitches in, I'm sure, and everybody has to work to make it work.
I'm sure there's pros and cons to having a big family, having a lot of siblings, a lot of You're making a face.
I'm trying to figure out the
I
pros.
was going to say you're trying to figure out the pros. I knew it.
Well, in this day and age, I don't know how in the world you could afford it. That'd be like a $5,000 a week grocery bill.
You'd be like that lady on TikTok that has like 7 kids by 7 different baby daddies, talking about how she got like, was it $5,000 a month in food stamps or something?
Okay.
I don't know. It was on TikTok. Anywho, let's get back to our story. Eddie Lee Sexton was born May 12th of 1942 near rural Logan, West Virginia. He was 7th in a family of 10 kids.
So again, big family.
Big family. His father was a coal miner and a part-time Baptist preacher. According to Otis Sexton, Eddie's brother, the family lived in poverty. Their father, William Dewey Sexton, was, quote, a godly man who took on the church flock like family. Otis said, that his father was always like opening their home to members of the church. It wasn't uncommon to see the yard filled with families kind of hanging out, picnicking, that type of thing.
Well, it sounds like he's really into it.
Yeah, Dylan is really into it. Since they didn't have money, the family had to hunt for their meals. Squirrel, whatever they could shoot. It's what they ate.
God, that's even more pressure to provide for a family this large. You don't have the guarantee of a stocked cooler at the grocery store.
Oh, no, this is a rough life. Often the Sextons didn't have heat, and the children would walk the train tracks, picking up lumps of coal that had fallen off the boxcars. Like, that's how poor they were.
That's one of the poorest things I've ever heard of.
It's pretty damn poor.
Walking the tracks to find, crumbs of coal that fallen off the cars.
So they could heat
so you can have some heat.
Yeah.
Coal's very efficient on heating homes and stuff, like old coal stove.
Thank you for that.
A very small amount produces a lot of heat.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Very, very cool, Dylan.
Neat old coal pile out back.
While I was in Indiana over the summer, I met an older couple, a farm couple, and they had what they called a popcorn stove.
Okay.
And they would put corn in it and somehow heat the house with this popcorn. I don't know. I wondered if they were just pulling my leg.
They said it was corn was the fuel.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, well maybe it's like dried out, like in a dehydrated corn state, right?
Like I said, I don't know.
Wait,
and maybe they were, like I said, maybe they was pulling my leg.
Did it smell like popcorn?
Well, it was summer and it was like 90 degrees outside, so I don't know, Dylan.
Damn it!
I'm just telling you a story. Okay, well, stop talking about it.
Could
you're asking too many questions.
Could you imagine if your whole house smelled like popcorn cooking? That'd be amazing.
Oh, no. That smell kind of, after a minute, starts to bother me a little bit.
Really?
Now, despite their poverty, Otis recalled Eddie being a mama's boy who got everything he wanted. Like, while the other children would get a Christmas present to share, Eddie would get his own Christmas present.
Oh.
Like, if they got Christmas presents at all.
Well, that's kind of mean.
Yeah. How's that work as a family? Your brother gets a present, but you kids have to share this one.
He gets his own apple. You guys share this
The
one.
4 of you have to share. Exactly. Now, the family moved to Sheridan, Ohio when the boys were a little bit older. William Sexton took up with another woman and split his time between his wife and the family household and his mistress. So much for being a godly man.
Yeah, it's not. That doesn't seem very Christian.
Well, at 52, William happened to be visiting his wife and children when he died. Just fell right over. Kicked the bucket.
Odds was he wouldn't even die at home. Who knew what family he'd die around?
And then he happened to die there. I know. I'm like, wow, you guys were lucky. Eddie was 10 years old. Otis went to work giving money to his mother. At 16, Otis enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Ed was 14 and ended up going to reform school for burglary. Eddie also exhibited some other peculiar behaviors as a child. One might even say these are traits of a psychopath.
Oh my gosh.
Like killing chickens, cutting their heads off just for fun.
Animal abuse.
Stringing them up so everybody could see what he had done. Yeah.
Damn, I think that's an even more disturbing element to it. Like, a lot of times people do this kind of in secret, cutting animals up or, doing mean things to animals. But he wanted everybody to know.
I guess so. So, very strange behavior from young Eddie. And then he's breaking in to businesses and homes and stealing things from their neighbors. And let's be honest, they're living in, what could be considered Appalachia, right? And these people don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of money. Their neighbors don't have a lot of money. So, of course, when tools and things like that start to go missing, these people are going to know someone has stolen it. And then you got young Eddie popping up with these items. So,
Well, and there's not a whole lot of options of who it could be because there's not a ton of people around.
Right. Well, Eddie ended up getting out of reform school and enlisted in the U.S. Army, but was discharged about 6 months later for bad conduct. Not sure exactly what he was doing, but he's a delinquent, so there's no telling. In 1963, after being kicked out of the Army, Ed married his 15-year-old pregnant girlfriend. They eloped. They eloped it in Dillon. The following day, he robbed a gas station near Williamson, West Virginia. Sentenced to 5 years in Moundsville prison for the robbery, Ed remained his mother's favorite. She sent him over $6,000 while he was incarcerated.
Wow. In today's dollars, that would be a ton of cash.
And these are not wealthy people. So it sounds like sending every dime she has to her son.
Well, at what point is she going to realize her favorite's really not doing that great? Has some bad characteristics.
After the birth of his son Patrick, Eddie's wife, the first wife, filed for divorce. Within 7 days of his release from prison, Eddie's mother purchased him a brand new Pontiac Firebird. That's his reward. You done good in prison, honey. Here's your new car.
These parents that treat a delinquent child like this, they just blow my mind. And it's almost like you almost can guarantee there's this type of treatment by at least one of the parents that kind of enables this person to be a lifelong shitbird.
Kind of helps steer them down a certain path.
Yeah, they have these. Well, they have these expectations that they're owed, everything, and they can do whatever they want. They don't have to follow the rules. And this is the type of adult that's created when you let a kid grow up like this.
Well, shortly after being released, Eddie met Estella Warren. Estella was known as May, and she grew up in a military family. Her father had been an Army Ranger, and so the family moved around frequently. By 1967, May had a son. But her son's dad went to Vietnam and she lost contact with him. She would later say she didn't know if he survived Vietnam or was killed. She just never heard from him again.
That's very sad.
So she lost contact with him. And May, she had grown up in Wheeling, West Virginia, or that's where she was like in her later years. She ended up moving to Canton, Ohio, where she had this young child, and she was kind of hoping she would just be able to save up some money. Her dream was to go to cosmetology school. May was introduced to Ed through her brother-in-law and had no idea that he had been incarcerated. In the beginning, Ed would take May to church where his brother Otis was a minister. And during their early courtship, Ed was very polite to his mother, which impressed May. And she also was kind of taken aback by his just his polite nature. She said he was not like overly affectionate. He didn't try to, take advantage of her or pressure her into having like a sexual relationship.
He didn't try to get some.
He was just like very respectful. Exactly. So by 1971, Ed and May were married. Little did she know what she was getting herself into. Shortly after they were married, Ed started abusing May. He took her driver's license, so she wasn't allowed to go anywhere.
So a total 180.
Yeah.
And people that can put up this front, and we all do it when we meet somebody. You show your shiny side or whatever.
You do?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure from the minute I met you, I was just like, look, you might want to get away from me. I'm a little crazy.
No, well.
And I got a bad temper. And
no, we all do the shiny side thing a little bit. But the people that can be put on a complete act.
No, it's wild.
To cover up who they truly are and they're nothing like their real self. I think that's it's kind of scary.
It is. I mean, I've dated people and, you get involved with them and things seem fine and you're 3 or 4 months into the relationship and then all of a sudden you're like, who is this person?
Right.
Like this monster emerges and they are like a completely different person and they had you totally snowed about who they were.
Yeah, and that's a very disturbing ability for someone to have.
Yeah, so, when that's happened, I'm just like, run.
Because normal
far
people
away.
Don't put all that effort into hiding who they are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I mean, you might just figure out they might have some characteristics you don't particularly care for or something like that. But when someone changes like that, and men and women can do it,
No, absolutely.
And it's very, I think that I'm sure there's some psychology studies out there about something like this, but it's very weird.
This is why from the moment I met you, I would hiss at you to let you know who I was.
Right.
Like a cat. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, that's the one for me, Dr. Phil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No. It's true though. It's very very disturbing, and you think like you hear these stories like how could you get involved with somebody who's just a total monster? But what I think people fail to realize is it's not like it happens overnight. It's like it happens over the course of time, and they put on this show for you, and then you're invested, and it can be months or even years into the relationship before they start to reveal who they really are.
Yeah, and you got to be a real piece of work to have to go through that type of effort to, cover up who you really are.
Yeah. By 1971, as I mentioned, Ed and May were married. And Ed decided to follow in his brother Otis's footsteps by becoming a minister. He opened a storefront church called Calvary Church of God. Otis was greatly disturbed when he visited his brother's church. His brother Ed was preaching a distorted version of the scriptures, which blended elements of Christianity, the occult, Satanism, fundamentalism, and science fiction.
My gosh. Dude, could you imagine being a visitor at this church?
Otis was appalled to hear Ed call men gods. The church barely had a congregation. It was kind of Ed, May, and then just maybe a few of their friends. And it ended up closing after 6 months. In the late 1980s, Estella Sexton, known as Pixie, a student at Jackson High School, became pregnant. Now, Pixie was awkward, quiet, considered strange. She really didn't have any friends. She dressed in clothes from the 1970s. And people knew, she wasn't allowed to socialize outside of school. And from what I understand, Jackson High School at this time, There was a lot of money in this town and a lot of preppy kids. They're driving BMWs. They're wearing Liz Claiborne blazers, the Ralph Lauren, polos, that kind of thing. It's the 80s. The prep look is in, the preppy look. And then here's this girl with greasy hair wearing these bell-bottoms and peasant blouses from the 70s.
Named Pixie.
Well, yeah, Pixie.
Right.
So I'm sure she stood out like a sore thumb. It was considered unusual by other students who knew Pixie because not only was she, not allowed to socialize, but definitely not allowed to date. So when she turns up to school her senior year pregnant, people were like, what? In the past, when Pixie had been invited to the movies or to hang out, she would tell people, quote, "My father wouldn't approve." When asked about the baby's father, Pixie had conflicting stories, but often said he was in the Navy or in Mexico.
Those are two very different things.
And though there were these discrepancies in Pixie's story, at this time she was a legal adult. She was 18, so there wasn't much that could be done. In November of 1988, 7-year-old Lana Sexton raised concerns when she told a teacher that her father had, quote, touched her titties.
Damn.
Further disturbing, Lana had a history of taking the tops off of Barbie dolls at school and saying, "Woo, look at those titties." Okay.
Titties?
Titties. I mean, I love titties too, but
I do too.
7-year-olds probably shouldn't be talking about titties all the time.
No, let's be honest. This is disturbing behavior.
Now, over the years, relatives, hospital workers, and teachers had made many referrals about the Sexton children to social services. The kids were dirty. There were stories of cruel punishments and family fights reported. Visits in 1979 and 1983 revealed a clean, tidy household. But other stories talked about the family living in filth and squalor. The Sexton children were frequently absent from school, yet there was always an excuse provided. The Sexton children were forbidden from discussing any aspects of their home life with outsiders. There were also fires at the Sexton home in 1982 and again in 1987. The fire in 1987 resulted in $32,000 in damages.
Damn, that's a pretty serious fire.
Patrick and Eddie Jr., the two oldest sons, had histories of theft, assault, and running away. Not only did social services have multiple reports about the Sextons, but they were known to local law enforcement. Since the 1970s, there had been over 30 incidents and reports regarding the family made to local law enforcement.
So this is one of those small town issues where you have this family, and if anyone hears their last name, people go, "Oh, well, you know about them."
Yeah.
Or they assume things about the entire family.
This family was known so much, in fact, Dylan, that there was a thing that people talked about in town. It was called the Sexton stare. Because all of the kids had this blank stare.
Like this 1,000-yard gaze?
Yeah. Just completely blank, checked out stare. And that became a thing. People would talk about the Sexton stare.
So you'd see this big group, a big family. I'm sure even if it's only a third of the family or half the family, it's, a bunch of people. And you would see them going around just kind of looking crazy.
Well, we're going to get into it. You didn't see them going around.
Oh, yeah, they didn't go anywhere.
We're going to talk about that.
Just using the term outsiders.
Outlanders.
For speaking to anyone outside of your household, that's probably an issue, right?
Is it? I mean, I don't talk to outsiders either.
No, but I'm just saying.
You're my only friend, Dylan.
But that's a strange way to view the world.
I'm reaching for your hand. You're my only friend.
It's like Michelangelo.
It's my only companion.
My little stubby finger.
You and Rufus.
Oh, I love it. And our listeners.
It's true.
They're part of our family as well.
Dylan, are you ready for some more craziness?
Yeah.
Ed had also terrorized a neighbor. He was known to terrorize his neighbors.
Well, I was just
or
thinking.
anyone who he didn't agree with.
I was just thinking about. I bet these people were just a treat to live next to.
So this man, this neighbor, and I believe he was somehow involved in law enforcement, like he had formerly been a police officer or something and had retired. But this man had a mentally disabled daughter that he cared for. But when his health started to fail, Ed reached out to this man and asked if he could take over the power of attorney for the man so he could make financial and health decisions for him and his daughter, just in case anything happened.
Right.
Well, the man turned down the offer, of course. I mean, who's gonna let their neighbor have this kind of power, right?
Hey, by the way, can I be your power of attorney, just in case?
Start asking people that, Randall.
I'm gonna start asking people that.
Well, Ed was furious that he'd been turned down.
So he just out of left field, he asked this person. No one had to, talk to it. No one was discussing the people's matters or anything, and just out of nowhere, he asked, "Can I be your power of attorney?" And it really pisses him off when they turn him down.
Yeah. Now, Patrick, who was in his 20s at the time, that's the oldest boy, he'd sort of been preying upon this mentally handicapped girl. And I say she was a girl, but I believe she was, 17, 18 at the time. And he'd been sort of romantically pursuing her. Now, at some point, Patrick took her to the bank where she withdrew thousands from an account and gave it to Patrick. And since her name was on the account, there wasn't much that could be done legally when her father went to the bank, pissed off, like, why did you let them take money out? The bank was like, well, she's an account holder. Her name is on the account.
That's how a bank works.
We didn't know we weren't supposed to do this, right? And of course, when he tried to report this to the police, there wasn't much that could be done about it. Ed then began harassing the neighbor. His sons would break this man's window. They would set stuff on fire and just generally intimidate the guy. If he went outside, they would yell obscenities at him. They would make threats. This man was afraid to leave his house. He was absolutely being tormented by Ed and the Sexton boys. And there's multiple boys. I mean, you've got Patrick, there's Eddie Jr., there's Willie, Charles, So imagine you've got a group of teenage boys.
Right. Out of control,
Damaging your property, vandalizing, threatening you every time you leave the house.
That kind of shit right there gets old very quick.
I mean, Ed and his sons made this man's life a living hell. Eventually, the man learned that calling law enforcement didn't accomplish anything either. It only aggravated the situation because law enforcement wouldn't do anything. They didn't have proof. They needed evidence. They would just tell him, well, we don't really know who did this to you. We can't. So it was just the cycle of shit happening, this man reporting it, and nothing being done. And then it just makes the Sextons even more angry.
Right. Keeps them worked up.
And they just keep, ramping it up. I can't imagine. This would not work for me, right? Would it work for you to be living in this kind of situation? I would move.
No, I find it tough to live by normal people sometimes.
At another point, Ed reported his nephew had been kidnapped. The adult nephew was mentally disabled and had been taken to Ed's house and held there. Ed had stolen the nephew's Social Security checks and had beaten the boy. And I say boy because he was young. I mean, he was, like a teenager. His nephew didn't want to stay in the house and had called relatives to pick him up. When his brothers had shown up, they were basically had to forcefully remove their brother, Ed's nephew, out of the house. Fighting off the other boys to get this guy out of the house.
Oh, my God.
Ed reported that the boy had been abducted, but his nephew disagreed and refused to return to Ed's house and told police, no, he held me there against my will, he beat me, and he stole my money.
It's like anybody they can, a strong arm. They don't care who it is,
No.
It doesn't, yeah.
They're bullies. Some social workers noted that Ed and May were concerned parents struggling to raise a large family. One social worker in the past had even praised Ed's parenting skills.
Well, and this is what happens in stuff like this. Everybody knows All the neighbors, friends,
Everybody knows.
they all know that these people are all unhinged.
Everybody knows.
The people who've been affected by them especially. But then when authorities, and they probably did a similar thing around cops, they bullshit their way out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
I mean, Ed has been described as the most charming, would have like the southern drawl he would kind of put on, and people were just like, wow, he's such a nice man. His kids are so well mannered. But it's because they're fucking afraid of him. We'll get into this. So in February of 1989, Sherry Sexton showed up to Jackson High School with red marks on her legs. She confided in another student that her father had beaten her with a belt. The very next day, Sherry didn't return to school at all. Yet social workers could not get Sherry to discuss the injuries. Without any kind of disclosure, social workers had little to go on. After the incident with Sherry, Ed would line the kids up before school each morning and hand them a quarter. He would demand that the children phone home if they saw any of their siblings, like speaking to anyone, teachers, guidance counselors, other students.
What a directive to give your children.
Like, I want you to rat on your brothers and sisters if you see them talking to anybody.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of.
In May of 1991, Michelle Sexton told her guidance counselor that she wanted to commit suicide. A social service worker named Wayne Welsh, who had investigated the Sherry Sexton abuse allegations, was back at Jackson High School where he would meet with Michelle. She told the social worker that she had been shunned by her family. Michelle's siblings were not allowed to talk to her because she had, quote, poisoned their minds. She wasn't allowed to leave the house or use the telephone. According to Michelle, after the incident with Sherry, her father had made the children travel in groups. The siblings were asked to tell on each other if they spoke to anyone outside the family, including teachers or classmates. Michelle said, quote, there's only one way to do anything, one way to think, Dad's way. Michelle confided that the children were told if they talked to anyone about the family or what went on inside their home, Ed would be thrown into jail and they would be taken away. Among the Sexton children, Ed Sexton was a common factor in all of their fears. Welsh recognized the cult-like behavior that Michelle Sexton was describing. He felt the Sexton family dynamics were that of a cult with Ed as the leader. Wayne Welsh would later say, quote, whenever you've got somebody who's controlling everybody else by that much fear and encouraging other members of this group to turn on each other, it shows the leader is very frightened about something getting out. The leader is guarding something terrible.
Could you imagine from this social worker's point of view? They're like, what in the world, you know? I mean, to actually describe a family as a cult is really a wild statement.
Despite Michelle's troubles, she refused to disclose any information really about her family other than they won't let me use the phone. I'm not allowed to leave the house. They're shunning me. I want to kill myself.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's not really any crimes being described in that, right?
Right.
I mean,
so once again, there was very little that could be done. So let's move on to Joel Good. He was a transfer student from Perry, Ohio. Both of his parents had died when he was young, so Joel and his brother were raised primarily by their grandparents. He ended up moving to Jackson Township to live with an aunt while he was in high school. Joel struggled academically, even with tutoring, and had cognitive issues. One classmate described him as, quote, being the nicest guy I ever met, but compared him to Forrest Gump. So he's, low IQ. He has his own issues. Somehow, the two shyest students at Jackson High School found each other. Joel, super shy, super quiet, ended up asking Pixie to prom. Now, once he invited Pixie Sexton to a family cookout, she brought along her baby, Dawn. Joel's aunt noted that to get Pixie to talk was like pulling teeth. She wouldn't tell anything about her family, herself. She was just really quiet. She had that Sexton stare.
She kind of sat there.
Yeah.
By the macaroni.
The aunt learned that Pixie had dropped out of culinary arts, like a cooperative program at the high school, after having the baby, and that she had been able to work at some restaurants in town. So they ended up going to prom together, And then Pixie ghosts Joel after the prom.
Oh.
It wasn't until a year and a half later, when they were both out of high school, that they reconnected. Out of the blue, Pixie contacted Joel again. She had had another baby, a little girl named Shasta. Joel's aunt was concerned. She didn't want her nephew to get seriously involved with a young mother who had 2 children. Joel could barely take care of himself and had to be reminded of basics like hygiene. Like, hey, you gotta brush your teeth. Gotta comb your hair. Gotta take a shower.
So he wouldn't be a good candidate for taking the reins of a young family and supporting the family.
No, Joe was also really naive and easily taken advantage of. And there had been a rumor circulating around town that the Sexton family belonged to a cult and that the sons had shown up to school quite often looking, quote, beat up. So this was very concerning for his Aunt Teresa. Joel was head over heels for Pixie Sexton. I mean, it didn't take long for him to just fall in love with this girl. He told his aunt that he wanted to marry her, but Aunt Teresa was worried that Joel was not ready for marriage. As you mentioned, I mean, he's barely got a job. He doesn't make much money. Can't really, I mean, he's kind of living on his own, but
he can hardly take care of
has
himself.
to have like daily check-ins to make sure you're eating and you're washing your clothes. I mean, his family was really concerned about him moving out on his own.
Right.
At this point. So he's like, I'm ready to get married. I'm going to marry Pixie. And we're planning to move to Montana with the Sexton family.
Oh my gosh. I bet his family is like, what in the world?
Well, Joel's Aunt Teresa wanted to meet Ed Sexton, Pixie's father. Joel had spoken highly of Ed, really liked this guy. When Aunt Teresa went to meet Ed, she thought it was kind of crass when he started asking her if Joel had any money coming in.
Oh, so trying to figure out if he gets any state money or anything like that.
Well, Joel had received $450 a month in Social Security benefits to help with expenses when he was a minor because his parents were both deceased.
Right. It's a death benefit of his parents' Social Security.
Yeah. But she didn't think that was anyone's business. And she thought this was really rude that this stranger is asking her these questions.
Well, it's the first time you're meeting him.
Ed Sexton showed her some brochures for a place called Skytop Ranch, which was a $1.9 million estate featured in the Robb Report, which the book described as a magazine for millionaires.
The Robb Report?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Aunt Teresa thought the Sextons definitely did not look like they had that kind of money to be buying this nearly $2 million ranch.
And this is where they're going to move to in Montana.
Yeah. But then Ed Sexton explained that he was making a multi-million-dollar deal with Burger King and Wendy's to promote Futuretrons.
Did you say Futuretrons?
Yeah.
What is a Futuretron?
Oh, Dylan.
What the hell?
Buckle up.
Oh, yeah, I forgot Ed likes science fiction. That was part of his church.
He really wanted to start his own version of Scientology.
So he's the poor man's
L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard. Instead of a fleet of ocean vessels, he has like a canoe down in the pond.
They do have a pond on their property.
Of course he does. Oh my gosh, dude. No. Gosh, today I was listening to something. They brought up Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
Listeners, if you do yourself a favor one day, if you want a rabbit hole that just gets weirder and weirder, go down that. Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and what happened between them, and including Jack Parsons' woman.
I was going to say, Jack Parsons was into a lot of strange shit. There was the girlfriend, his mistress or whatever. Yeah.
And this is the guy who brought us like modern day rocketry.
Yeah.
I mean, it had a lot to do with NASA.
Really into the occult.
Dude.
Crowley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, it was kind of hot.
Dude. Hubbard was such a wackadoodle that Crowley called up Parsons and was like, you got to watch out for this guy. He's no good. I mean, how bad do you have to be for Aleister Crowley to think you, you have a bad reputation.
Yes, everyone should go learn about the sex cult Antichrist who propelled us into space.
Yes. Anyway. All right. So here we go. The poor man's L. Ron Hubbard.
Futuretrons.
Futuretron.
I feel like I should tell you about Futuretrons in a robot voice.
Do you have information about the Futuretrons?
I mean, a little bit. It doesn't really make sense, but it seems that Ed and his daughter Lana had these marks on their palms. So they're kind of like aliens or...
Wait, I'm trying to figure out how this is a cross promotion across multiple forms of media.
I'm not really sure why Burger King or Wendy's would be interested in Futuretrons.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. How does this wrap up? How does this connect to my Whopper?
They're going to trade in the golden paper crown at Burger King, and they're going to give you a tinfoil hat.
Oh, okay.
Basically. Okay. So in this bastardized, doesn't really make sense way, Ed explained that he and his daughter Lana had these marks on their palms because they're like special chosen. They're like born from alien blood or something.
Okay.
And he told Teresa that there were some satanic cults out there that wanted to hunt them down. And that if they knew that Ed and Lana had these marks on their hands, he said, quote, they'd want to sacrifice her. The mark on her hand makes her so powerful, she could destroy them.
Oh, my gosh. And I still don't see how this ties to the Nuggets.
Well, I don't know what being a Futuretron has at all to do with a Whopper Jr.
Well, look, back in the day, I would have been like, man, I'm going to go by Burger King to see what's up with this Futuretron meal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, when I first heard Futuretrons, I was like, so what are they like, Optimus Prime? And
this was one of the early collaboration meals.
More than meets the eye.
They had the Travis Scott and the Cardi B meal, but early on we had the Futuretron meal.
Somehow Ed and his daughter were going to like lead some revolution at the end of the alien apocalypse and like save the world.
Okay, again,
like his
I don't know how this is
Futuretron world.
How is this helping you purchase this very expensive ranch in Montana?
Why does Wendy's want to be part of it?
I don't know.
I don't feel like Dave wants to associate with this.
I feel like this is a disrupting advertising campaign, and now I want to know more. So, I mean, it's kind of working.
Well, Aunt Teresa informed the Sextons that Joel would not be accompanying them to Montana. So it didn't take long for Pixie to break up with him after this meeting. It was clear to Teresa that Ed Sexton exercised extreme control over his family. Teresa told Joel, quote, you really need to find someone else who doesn't have kids, somebody you can have kids with. But all Joel would say is, but I love Pixie.
Oh, poor guy.
Soon Pixie and Joel were back together. Joel started spending more time at the Sexton household, like 3 to 4 days in a row. He wouldn't call home when his family would try to reach him at the Sexton house. They would be denied the opportunity to speak with him. He was always gone. He wasn't there.
He's
Couldn't
in the
come
shower.
to the phone. Yeah. His family started to notice things about Joel were changing, like his appearance, for example. He'd always been like a really clean-cut kid, but now he was looking really scraggly, had grown his hair out, had a beard, and was always looking kind of disheveled, dirty clothes, unkempt.
They're like, you're too clean, Joel. We need to get you sextoned.
And so when his aunt would be like, you should cut your hair, shave your beard, he would say, well, Pixie likes this. She likes me to look like this. What's that face?
I'm just... Well,
She wants me to look like Grizzly Adams.
Well, I feel bad because all you can do, and is, with Joel, it sounds like this might be a little bit more of the case. You worry for them. You want them kids, family to do the best, but at a certain point, you can't control them, unless you're Ed Sexton, I guess. But you can't control everything they do. All you can do is advise them, and it's tough when you see them getting into a situation that has adult consequences. You know what I'm saying? And you worry for them. And but you can't make them do exactly what you want, even if you think it's for their best interest. You know what I'm saying?
Joel's family thought it was odd that Pixie, who was by now 21 years old and the mother of 2 young children, had a 10 p.m. curfew.
Yeah, that's odd.
3-year-old Dawn wasn't speaking and instead sat in her mother's lap with a blank stare that, again, people referred to as the Sexton stare. Like, even this little kid had it at 3.
My gosh.
Yeah, Joel's family, I mean, they were just kind of weirded out because what 3-year-old kid just sits quietly
And stares.
I mean, most little kids that age are running around, they're playing,
No, I'd want them to
engaging.
sit and stare sometime. Will you just sit down and stare for a minute?
Joel's grandfather said, quote, "They're too backward," talking about the Sextons. Grandpa also thought that these 2 little kids looked a hell of a lot like Pixie's father.
Oh God.
Yeah. Well, they tried to discourage him from pursuing this relationship, but we all know how that works out. You can't tell young lovers not to see each other.
But she touched my baby,
They're
Ma.
going to want to see each other.
They're gonna keep seeing each
Well,
other.
despite using condoms, Joel informed his aunt that Pixie was pregnant and they planned to marry on Valentine's Day of 1992. Joel married Pixie without telling his family at all and moved in to the Sexton household. Pixie's children were now calling him Dad. Then Joel let his aunt know that Pixie had miscarried the baby, and she didn't believe that Pixie had been pregnant at all.
Yeah. Well, and now Joel's getting entangled in this very strange family. And I'm sure his family is very, very worried about him.
And with good reason.
Yeah.
By the way, this is part 1. We have a part 2 that will further blow your mind.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
So a friend that worked at the health department informed Teresa that Joel had been to the health department with Pixie, where they had filed a certificate of paternity for Dawn. The child had been born 5 months before Joel had even asked Pixie to the prom. Like, his aunt knew good and damn well that child did not belong to him.
No, there's no way, right?
They also wanted to amend Shasta's birth certificate as well. In February of 1992, Wayne Welsh, the social worker, was contacted once again by Jackson High School regarding Michelle Sexton. This time, Michelle Sexton claimed she was pregnant and said, quote, "They're trying to kill my baby."
I mean, the social worker's got to be like, what do? We got to do something, but, every time he tries, no one wants to cooperate with him to, get something done.
Michelle told Welsh the baby belonged to her boyfriend. Her younger brother, James, had seen Michelle kissing this boyfriend and informed her father, Ed. Ed had backhanded Michelle, leaving a big mark on her right cheek along with a scratch made by his ring. Ed tried to kick her in the stomach, and when that failed, James kicked Michelle in the stomach until her sister Sherry forced herself between the two of them. According to Michelle, Sherry had been pregnant a year earlier, and James had kicked her in the stomach, causing a miscarriage.
All right, so it's time to kick the women. I mean, who? This is some cruel shit, man. You kick a woman in the stomach until she miscarries. I mean, that is just evil.
The social worker learned that Sherry Sexton had already had a baby at this point. So she's already had a baby. I guess no one really knew she had had this child because by now she's graduated, she's out of school. But Michelle informs him that, oh, well, Sherry's got a baby, but she was pregnant a year ago and miscarried, but now she's got this other baby. So the social worker is wondering about these alleged pregnancies under the Sexton roof in less than 4 years.
All the girls.
There had been like 4 or 5 pregnancies, according to Michelle.
Yeah.
Knowing good and damn well, like, this family is very strange. These kids are not really allowed to leave the house. They don't have friends. I mean, it's not really making sense.
They're not seen around with a boy.
Yeah.
They're not out dating. No one knows who would be the fathers.
Right.
Yeah.
Michelle said she could not return home for fear she would be hurt or killed. They placed her in a Christian pro-life organization's program, which helped find stable homes for young unmarried women. It was called a shepherding program. And this organization, I mean, they were doing a lot of good in the community. They were placing these, unwed young mothers in homes where they would have a safe, stable environment. So the following day, which was February 12th of 1992, Michelle was escorted to her family home where she was able to pick up her clothes. Ed and May were informed that their daughter would not be returning to their care. However, things at home where Michelle was placed, weren't really working out, Dylan. Michelle was really bad about violating rules of curfew. The program director tried explaining that the rules were not about punishment, but accountability, and that letting people know where you are is more about responsibility. It wasn't them trying to control her.
They're just trying to teach her.
That it wasn't like her parents.
Right.
Michelle didn't seem to care. Michelle's host family noted bizarre behavior too. Michelle would sleep under the bed. She would have nightmares, wake up screaming all the time, and would sometimes be found huddled in a closet, like shivering and shaking and just super afraid.
Sleeping under the bed. I mean, when once you realize that would freak me out. And obviously she has problems. I mean, I think that's obvious. And what could you imagine?
No.
Once you realize someone sleeps under the bed and stuff like that.
It was revealed that Michelle was not pregnant. So this discovery led Michelle to make a startling admission. She finally said, quote, "My dad raped me." Michelle explained that Ed often beat his wife and children, threatening to kill anyone who told about the abuse inside the home. Ed would repeat the phrase, quote, "A good snitch is a dead snitch."
Damn, Ed's living by street rules.
It's a Futuretron rule, Dylan.
I forgot.
The Futuretrons are for the street. Now, during Michelle's stay, the host family reported someone calling their home at all hours of the day and night, quote, "breathing heavily into the phone." I'll never understand the heavy breathing thing. If somebody calls me doing that, I'm just going to hang up on them. Like, I don't know.
Why don't we? Well, now you just get all these telemarketers trying to sell you Medicare when you're only 46 years old. That's what happens to me. I think a heavy breather would be refreshing.
I'll call you and breathe heavily in the phone.
How would you breathe again?
I'll just wheeze.
Gosh.
I've been on a hike.
I'm like, do you need help, ma'am? Where are you?
With Michelle's curfew problems, a lack of pregnancy, and these strange phone calls, this host family wanted Michelle removed from their home.
They were done with it.
It was just too much. They weren't planning to take on all these issues, right? Michelle was taken to a safe house for battered women. When it was recommended that Michelle report the rape to police, she was terrified. She said she was afraid to talk to police. Ed Sexton had told his family that he had friends in law enforcement who would lock up the children. Michelle was afraid she would end up in jail. Finally, Michelle opened up, and she told social workers that she had seen her father kiss Lana and Kimberly, her younger sisters, on the lips, and that she was worried about their safety. It was also noted that Michelle had never experienced what people would consider normal stuff, Dylan. She had never gone anywhere, not to a mall, not to a restaurant, nowhere. Not to a gas station.
And she's grown.
She's 18 years old.
Yeah. That's wild.
The only time she was ever allowed to go anywhere was when Ed took the family on short camping trips. The children were only allowed to go to school, which Michelle loved. Michelle said school was an escape and it meant she wasn't at home. The only luxury provided to the Sexton kids was a television, which she was allowed to watch sometimes. In the Sexton house, the boys were given more leeway than the girls. Some of her brothers had been allowed to play sports and leave the house. Christopher, who was reportedly May's favorite, was allowed to be on a school athletic team. I think he played or was on the wrestling team. One of the other brothers was on the school football team. When Ed thought Michelle was pregnant, he told her that she could get a boyfriend. Michelle thought this was very weird because there had always been these very strict rules about dating. That's when Michelle met a boy named Jeff, and soon Ed befriended this kid, took him in under his wing.
So it's basically he wants them to get a beard. If they may be pregnant or,
Sounds like he wants them to get a boy they can blame it on.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Or just cover for him because of cover of his abuses on his own daughters.
Ed even gave the young man a ring so he could propose to Michelle. She had not seen this boyfriend since she had left home and was placed into this battered women's shelter. Now, after living in the shelter for a period, Michelle attempted suicide. She would say, quote, "I just couldn't take it anymore." Michelle phoned her uncle Otis from a psych ward where she was being held. Now, it didn't surprise Otis that he was hearing from his niece and that she was hospitalized. It also didn't shock him when Michelle informed her uncle that she'd been raped by her father. Otis had suspected unsavory activities in the Sexton household for years. It was after this admission that Otis called Wayne Welsh to share his concerns. On April 2nd of 1992, the Social Services Agency received an anonymous phone call from someone claiming that Sherry Sexton had been raped by her father, Ed. The caller also was showing concern for the younger daughters. And at this point, it had only been 14 days since Michelle Sexton had disclosed any kind of sexual abuse. On April 3rd of 1992, Welsh interviewed Lina and Kimberly, the younger daughters. They denied any wrongdoing in the Sexton household. So, by all accounts, 52-year-old Otis Sexton was like a truly decent man. He had been a minister. He was a retired minister. He had 6 adult daughters. And he reported that there had been no abuse in their childhood home, meaning that, neither Otis nor Ed or any of their siblings had ever been abused, physically, sexually, anything like that. And, this wasn't something that went on in their family. He said he didn't know why his brother Ed was engaging in deviant behavior, but blamed it on his time in prison. Otis felt that Ed's time in state prison had really corrupted him morally. Not only was there sexual abuse, according to Michelle, but also physical abuse. She said, quote, "Until 16, you get the belt, then graduate to the fist." This was a phrase that would be repeated later by multiple Sexton children.
Jesus. All types of abuse. Physical, sexual, emotional. I mean, this is crazy.
Like I said, this story is spot.
And to have children that you control them, it's almost a unique situation for with a person like Ed, because it's not outside people. It's not people he's met and brought into his little cult. He created his own cult with his own family. It's very strange.
So finally, Michelle described what had happened to her. She said in December of 1991, Ed had asked her to go on a drive. Michelle was excited because the kids rarely got to go on a car ride. It was a really big deal to be invited to go for a ride in the car. And also, she was never allowed out of the house. So again, this is like, wow, a really exciting opportunity, right?
God, it's like somebody when they get out of prison, been in prison for 20 years, and they're seeing the world again for the first time.
Ed told her they needed to discuss her future. Michelle was a good student, and she might be college bound. Ed wanted to talk about colleges and what Michelle might want to do with her life. Michelle said they drove in the family van to an area, but instead of talking, it seemed like it might have been kind of a wooded area or something, which she thought was strange. But instead of talking about her future, Ed raped her. Then later he told her, quote, "Say anything to anybody and I'll kill you. It would be very easy. Girls disappear every day."
My gosh.
Michelle revealed other information about her father, Ed. She said he received disability checks, but faked being in a wheelchair. The only time Ed used the wheelchair is when he wanted to con people, which he did often. Ed told people he had terminal cancer and others that he suffered from muscular dystrophy. The Sextons relied on financial support from charitable organizations and government assistance. Ed also claimed to be Native American and told people that he sat on the Allegheny Tribal Council, yet this council didn't exist.
It's just,
It's not any kind of federally recognized tribe.
I'm a disabled tribal council member.
Just
Hell,
wait.
Ed.
Ed's rolling around in like a headdress,
Yeah.
feather headdress, just being offensive.
Yeah, with some crutches and shit.
Okay. Also, Ed had a painting business, and Michelle reported that he would climb on these ladders and do all kinds of like physical labor, but then claim that he was disabled, and that none of the money he made from the painting business was reported to the IRS. It was all cash under the table. Other startling admissions rolled out during multiple interviews with Michelle. She said at 12, Ed had tried to molest her, but that he couldn't, quote, get it in. Michelle claimed her sister's children belonged to Ed as a result of incest. Pixie and Sherry had been engaging in sexual relations with their father since they were 12 years old. Their brother Matthew had witnessed Sherry and Ed having sex in the family van. Michelle also admitted that she and Sherry had discussed the incest privately, speculating that Dawn and Shasta belonged to their father. They knew Pixie had never had a boyfriend. Ed had only allowed Pixie to date, Joel specifically, after the children were born. Pixie was ordered to go get on welfare, and Ed was taking the money that was being given to her. Michelle also said that Sherry's son Christopher belonged to Ed and, quote, stated, she's never had a boyfriend in her life.
Damn.
So he's fathered 3 kids with his daughters, according to his daughter.
So disgusting.
Michelle also stated that Ed had children with other relatives on her mother's side of the family. May's sister was assaulted by Ed and had a teenage daughter by him, and that they didn't come around because of this alleged rape.
Wait, whose sister?
His wife, May's sister.
My God.
Abuse was rampant in the household. Michelle described like these ritualistic type of whoopings. It's WHUPPING.
Okay.
Not whippings, but whoopings.
Whoopings. I've been whooped before.
Yeah. The kids were made to go to their parents' bedroom, strip naked, and spread out on the bed where they would be whipped by Ed or May. She said May would lose control and didn't know when to stop hitting the children. Once her brother Charles, whose nickname is Skipper, they all have weird nicknames too, by the way. Charles, known as Skipper, got 49 lashes with a belt, and that May had choked him. Then she locked him in a closet naked.
Jesus.
According to Michelle, Pixie was, quote, Daddy's girl who told Ed everything. Therefore, the siblings knew better than to discuss anything with Pixie. So if they were kind of speaking amongst themselves about the abuse or speculating anything, they knew not to tell Pixie because she would immediately go tell her dad. Ed had held a shotgun to May's head once and often beat her, all in front of the kids. Once, when he was abusing their mother, the children jumped in trying to aid her. Yet the next day, Ed and May punished the children, like, together for trying to intervene.
I mean, just imagine from the children's perspective in a situation like this. I mean, there's no one to turn to.
No.
You try to help your mom because she's getting beat, and then she takes part in punishing you for that very act the next day. I mean, what do you do?
Michelle also said once she saw her father and Eddie Jr., an older brother, it's like a basement / garage, one of those, drive-in garages.
Right.
In the home's basement. And that she thought she had seen a body in the trunk of their car. When she asked Eddie Jr. about the body, he told her to mind her business.
My God.
Ed had installed a recorder from Radio Shack on the telephone so that it could tape any incoming or outgoing phone calls. This would let him know if any of the children tried to sneak and use the telephone. Michelle didn't know if the boys were being sexually abused, but said Ed would sometimes tell her brothers, quote, I'm going to get some butt tonight.
What?
Yeah. She also said that Ed had taken her brothers into the bathroom and measured their penises. Everyone in the family was told about the boys' penis sizes. Michelle was given the nickname Deep Throat by her father because she was able to swallow a hot dog whole. Ed would make her perform this trick in front of different men, including her Uncle Otis, who had been horribly offended by it.
Yeah, I would say most normal people would be offended by it. Hey, watch this trick.
Watch my daughter.
Daughter
Come here, Deep Throat. swallow a hot dog whole.
It's so disgusting.
How is that even possible?
I don't even know how you don't choke on the hot dog, but
I can't even swallow a vitamin without almost dying.
I don't know who to be comfortable enough to show this to people. It just shows you how sick he really is.
Michelle spoke of strange Saturday night rituals called dance parties, in which her father would make the girls dance in a seductive manner while he sat in his chair watching, and would get upset if the girls weren't participating and basically forced them to dance. Dance sexy. Otis told Wayne Welsh some other troubling information. He said back in 1979, Otis had allowed one of his daughters to babysit their cousins. One of the girls called home to say that the boys, Eddie Jr. and Willie, were naked, tied up in their beds as punishment.
Jeez.
Over the years, Otis had seen Ed kissing his daughters, specifically Sherry, on the mouth. Otis suspected incest but had no proof. He warned his brother Ed that, quote, it didn't look right. Funny enough, though, Ed told all of his kids that Otis was a pervert who liked little girls and had been to prison for being a pervert. And Ed denied that he had ever been to prison, that it was his brother Otis who had been to prison.
So basically, he's got that backwards.
Yeah. With overwhelming amounts of information about abuse, on April 16th, a dependency complaint was drafted. A judge signed off on a pickup order for the Sexton children. Though there was scant evidence beyond Michelle's verbal disclosures, the order would give social services 30 days to get hard evidence for the case while keeping the children out of the home. Kimberly, Lana, and Matthew, the younger children, were picked up from school without protest and placed into foster care. Christopher and James, who were teenagers, were absent from school, and Charles, who was 16 at the time, became belligerent and refused to go with social workers. By 4:30 p.m. on April 16th, police and social workers arrived at the Sexton home on Caroline Street to pick up the other children, Christopher and James, along with also serving this paperwork, letting them know, we've taken your kids. Ed Sexton told authorities, quote, this is all a big misunderstanding, while May shouted, he doesn't molest anybody. He doesn't hurt none of these kids. Yet, not even 24 hours out of the house, the kids started talking. 16-year-old Charles admitted that both parents beat him frequently. One of his punishments was being forced to stand naked in the living room, holding an encyclopedia above his head, while the whole family watched. And this would go on for hours. That he would just stand with an encyclopedia raised above his head, naked.
In front of everybody.
Yeah, while everybody's just hanging out and walking around.
That's very weird.
Very weird. He said his mother had beaten him recently, accusing him of inappropriately touching his sister Lana. Matthew also confirmed beatings and said that Michelle had told him she had seen Pixie and Ed having sex on the family sofa. James, who was on the autism spectrum, repeated the claims of physical abuse, saying everyone had been beaten with a belt, which often left cuts and bruises on the kids. The older children were hit in the face. He said Pixie beat her kids with a belt as well. He confirmed that the siblings were asked to spy on each other and report back to their father. James said, quote, there's lots of sex in the family. Ed, he said, forced him and Kimberly to play a game where they had to get on all fours and sniff each other's bellies, arms, armpits, and feet. James said, quote, he wants me to be a dog.
Jesus.
Like, what? There was also information about rituals being performed in the household, like sacrifices with cats and, quote, babies, according to James. Ed had performed seances in front of the children. He had worn a black cloak, called himself a warlock, and would tell them he had supernatural powers like telepathy and that he could communicate with ghosts and spirits. Several of the children began becoming sexually abusive toward one another. James would say his brother Charles had molested him and Christopher. Later, when James mentioned it to Christopher, he had denied it and said, quote, you don't know what you're talking about, even though he had seen it happen. Like he was in the bedroom when it happened.
Right. Well, I mean, this family's so full of dysfunctional behaviors. and it's so internalized. It makes it way worse than God. And there's nobody, again, there's nobody to turn to for help. Can't tell your mom, your dad, obviously. You're not allowed to interact with anyone outside the house, hardly. There's not external family or friends. And you can barely, go to school and talk to anyone without your dad finding out about it or the fear of him finding out about it. I mean, my God.
So dysfunctional. Michelle was asked to take a polygraph exam to confirm the details of these interviews. She had finally graduated from McKinley High School. It had taken her a while, and she had been moving kind of back and forth between, shelters and different homes. And then all of a sudden, Michelle retracted her allegations, which complicated the case. Authorities figured the Sextons were bringing in about $50,000 in tax-free income a year from their various scams and government assistance checks. May, Sherry, and Pixie received welfare. James and Willie were getting disability checks for about $400 each every month. Ed was also receiving some sort of disability and workers' compensation, as well as collecting monies from insurance scams, like setting the house on fire. And at one point, he'd reported $20,000 in thefts from his property, claiming that their house had been burglarized. And law enforcement felt like he was pulling these insurance scams, but didn't have enough evidence to arrest him.
Right.
When the family showed up in court for this family court hearing, Ed was in his wheelchair once more. He told the judge the family was Native American and that the case should be transferred to tribal court. Yet there was no record that any member of the Sexton family was Native American, and the tribe he claimed didn't exist or wasn't federally recognized. This tribal council he kept talking about, there was no...
The Allegheny Tribal Council.
There was no Allegheny Tribal Council. On November 21st, a Saturday, Ed called Channel 5 News to say he was barricaded inside his house on Caroline Street with weapons. Matthew had run away from foster care, and 16-year-old Charles was also with Ed after having been picked up by his father. To prepare for this standoff, Ed had purchased supplies including ammunition, food. They placed mattresses over the doors, covered the windows. When law enforcement arrived, some of the Sextons were inside the house. Ed demanded that his kids be returned by Christmas or they would all flee the state. He told authorities on the phone, "It's the system against me and my family." Sexton ended up trying to broker a deal with law enforcement after a 3-hour standoff. Basically, he wanted custody of his kids back. To end the ordeal, social services agreed to remove the current caseworker, because Ed didn't like this woman, and that Christopher and Kimberly, who had not disclosed any abuse, would be returned to May's care.
Oh, my God.
But part of the condition was that Ed would have to leave the house. He would not be able to have contact with the children who were in state's custody. The Department of Health and Human Services, they could have removed the children at this point because of the standoff, but didn't, which is going to be a huge mistake later. Now, Ed Sexton is arrested, and he's charged with 2 misdemeanors of child endangerment and inducing panic. And again, he was ordered to stay away from the family. Ed moved 10 minutes away from the family's home into a campground. Like, he had a camper and he stayed in that. The felony abduction charges that had also, like, he'd been charged with abduction for holding them in the house during the standoff. They were dismissed because May and the children were not able to testify because no one could find them. When social services went to family court to remove Kimberly, Christopher, and Charles from May's custody, May didn't show up. Ed Sexton would admit that he had told his wife to take the children and run. Now, due to the taboo nature of incest, people didn't really want to discuss this matter. Often people who'd moved to Ohio from West Virginia were called ridge runners, and they were considered like poor hillbillies and often looked down, people looked down on them. And no one seemed to want to really get involved in the incestuous aspect of this case. Like, even though it's being reported and it's, being investigated. It was like nobody really wanted to talk about it or get involved or make a big deal out of that part of it.
So even local authorities were kind of hesitant to get into all that.
Right. So while in a foster home, Lana had a lot of issues. At times, her foster parents thought she was suffering from demonic possession. They described it as like the exorcist. They said her body would contort in strange ways, and she would scream that he was coming to get her. She seemed to believe that her father had some sort of supernatural powers and was sending demons after her.
Damn.
But she wasn't the only one. James and Michelle were also experiencing these types of episodes. After 7 months with a foster family, Lana Sexton disclosed that her birth mother, May, had sexually abused her. A medical exam determined the girl had vaginal scarring, which was consistent with her story. So with this information, Stark County moved to seek custody of all the minor Sexton children. Ed once again tried using his Native American status to move this criminal case to tribal court, but this strategy would prove to be ineffective.
But I'm Native American in a wheelchair.
Yes.
What?
With cancer and muscular dystrophy.
And some kind of a meal collaboration with Burger King and Wendy's.
And a Futuretron.
Yeah, and
I am a Futuretron.
Wait a second. Did you see my Futuretron marks? I mean, what are we doing here, people?
Did Tim McGraw write that song Indian Outlaw?
Yeah.
About Ed?
Yeah, because I'm a wheelchair outlaw.
Half Cherokee and Futuretron.
Jesus.
I take my orders from the aliens.
Ed's a piece of
I'm
shit.
going to sacrifice a cat.
Ed's such a piece of shit. I hate him.
Dude, he's a fucking scumbag.
For real. I mean, just the emotional and physical, all these abuses on these poor kids. And May, I'm sure she's abused in many ways as well, but
she's also
to
not
be
okay.
She's not okay.
She's not a good person.
But no, she's not. To be able to watch this
She's a creep.
Time after
She's
time,
a weirdo.
her own children being, done like this by their father.
Well, she's participating.
Yeah, I know.
So in the meantime, we've got Joel, now married to Pixie, right?
Damn.
So Joel's family is noticing these extreme changes in him. He's lost weight. They notice not only is his appearance like he's kind of gaunt, but he's got the long scraggly hair. He's dirty. He's smelly. And he just seems like he stopped talking altogether. When they were able to see him, which was rare, Joel didn't speak at all. Pixie would talk over him and just would not let him speak. Joel was also responsible for all the child care. His family noticed that he's the only one taking care of the kids.
Of her two kids.
Of her two kids, yeah.
Right.
So while these legal battles are raging, Joel and Pixie move into an apartment in Bolivar, Ohio. Sherry and her son Christopher had been sent to Florida to live with her uncle David Sexton. The older Sexton boys, Patrick and Eddie, they were both married and kind of lived out on their own. And though the children, though the couple was ordered to have no contact with these children, witnesses reported seeing Ed and May outside Faircrest Middle School trying to make contact with Christopher and Lana. And though Ed was living in a camper, he was only 10 minutes away from the family home, so he was still around the children all the time. Ed and May were playing the system, violating this no contact order. So by appearance, he was living elsewhere, but he's still in the home and he's still around the kids.
Right.
Yeah. A few days after that court hearing, Ed, May, Christopher, Kimberly, and Charles, there's so many of them, they left Ohio. It was around this time that Joel showed up at his aunt's house, and he's black and blue, covered in bruises. He had been beaten, but wouldn't give up any information about who had hurt him. He said Pixie had thrown him out of the car, and he'd walked 12 miles to his aunt's house.
Damn.
Pixie had wanted a divorce, she told him. So the next day, Joel's aunt took him to an attorney and filed for divorce. She paid for the lawyer. She's all on board with you need to be away from these people, this family. You need to be away from Pixie.
Well, yeah. How could you?
I'll pay for it. Let's keep you safe.
How could you not be? I mean, you've seen him change in all these negative ways, and now he's shown up on your doorstep, beat all to hell.
Saying he walked 12 miles.
Saying he walked 12 miles and was thrown from a car.
Yeah.
By his woman.
Who wants a divorce.
Who wants a divorce.
Yeah. And then without warning, Joel went back to Pixie. His family didn't hear from him for days. His Aunt Teresa said, quote, I had a horrible feeling he was dead. When his aunt was able to finally speak to him again, she warned him, quote, the way they beat you up, they'll kill you next time. So a neighbor named Augusta Townsend had allowed May and Ed to stay at her house after that police standoff. Like, he had gotten arrested, got out of jail, and then they stayed at her house for a couple of days. She would describe Ed and Pixie's relationship as abnormal and said they had a sort of husband and wife type jealousy. She thought May knew Pixie and Ed were involved in an incestuous sexual relationship, but that the mother didn't seem to care. On several occasions, Augusta was horrified to see Kimberly, quote, squirming, crawling, and climbing on her father's lap in a sexual way. So during their stay, one of the nights, Augusta had gotten up in the middle of the night to, like, go get water or, something like that. And while she's walking through the house, she witnesses May performing oral sex on her son, Christopher.
Oh, my God.
While Charles is sitting in a chair watching.
I mean, people.
Like in this woman's living room.
What are we doing here?
Yeah.
I don't know what exactly is happening, but y'all can't stay here anymore.
Well, that's when Augusta began shouting, quote, ain't gonna be no motherfucking shit going on in my house. I love kids.
Exactly.
Immediately, the Sexton family packed up their belongings and left the Townsend house in the middle of the night. Augusta would tell police, quote, them is some freaky motherfuckers. Before leaving, Ed left a warning for Augusta. She found a single hollow point bullet on the kitchen counter, which she took as a warning to keep quiet, or like a threat.
Well, yeah.
Ed and May traveled along with Willie, Christopher, Charles, and Kimberly to Oklahoma to do further research on their Native American ancestry. Ed told them they would hide out on a reservation, and that way they could be protected from authorities in Ohio.
He's trying to convene the Allegheny Tribal Council, and the whole system's working against this poor man.
Down with Whitey, colonizers. Yet there was no indication that Ed Sexton or May Warren Sexton had Native American heritage. Once they exhausted that search, the family showed up at May's brother's house in Indiana. At one point during their legal woes, Charles had run away from foster care, and to keep him from, being captured and sent back to foster care, May had sent Charles to live with this uncle. So this uncle just, one day this kid shows up like, hey, I need to stay here.
Yeah, we're on the run from the white man. So if he does find some magically some Native American ancestry, it's not going to fix all these problems that you have, you sick piece of shit. It's so crazy.
Well, while he'd been staying there, Charles had told his uncle about satanic sacrifices, that Ed had killed a cat on a table, that he had lit candles all around the table, and that he had a satanic Bible and was performing seances. Charles was having nightmares as well, waking up screaming, just terrified of his father. So, of course, this uncle was shocked when Ed and May roll up in an RV with the kids.
Hey.
Because at this point, Charles had left and gone back to Ohio. They're not really sure what's going on. And then all of a sudden, it's like Cousin Eddie and the crew show up.
We're here to visit.
Shitter's full.
You mind if we bed down in your living room?
Yeah.
What the?
You buy my kids Christmas? So, while this is happening in Indiana, in the meantime, Pixie is back in Ohio trying to sell the family home for her parents. They had an auction in which furniture and other items were sold. They made about $700. Daniela Sexton, Eddie Jr.'s wife, filed a police report. She alleged that Pixie had pulled a .357 Magnum on the couple, meaning Daniela and Eddie Jr., when they'd shown up at the family home to pick up an appliance they had bought from the auction. She'd pulled a gun on them and threatened them.
Oh, so the auction wasn't a real auction.
I don't know.
Yeah, if you all
The
come back.
thing is, okay, so there was this auction house or whatever that was hired to
An estate sale of sorts.
yes, to perform the sale and also to sell the home.
Right.
So a couple committed to buying this house, and we're trying to get a hold of Ed to sign the contract to sell the house. And Pixie's trying to say, no, my dad gave me authority to do that. I can sign it, but
It doesn't work
that
like
doesn't
that.
work. So anyway, this couple ended up pulling out of the deal, and the guy who owned the auction house ended up getting stiffed. He got no money out of selling any of the items and no money out of selling the house, and Ed owed him money.
Right.
Yeah,
So it was a wash for him.
absolutely. So in Indiana, relatives were concerned because Ed not only showed up with all these people in this RV trying to camp out, but he had an arsenal of weapons, and they thought it was kind of weird because the kids knew how to handle the guns, break the guns down, clean the guns.
Yeah, most kids. That's not true for the whole family of kids usually.
No, not typically. Although all this stuff is happening, they're wanted, they're on the run. Ed seemed more relaxed. His attitude toward the children had changed. He kind of allowed them to be free, like they were able to leave the house, and they were like liberated.
Well, I think he's realized that his brainwashing all these years has worked. And for the most part, they hold allegiance to him, right? They seem to always come back. You know what I mean?
The family ended up renting a small trailer at Bushman's Lake. It was like a vacation area, but the owner didn't know that 11 people would be living in the 2-bedroom trailer. By then, Joel and Pixie had joined the Sextons along with Pixie's kids. Joel and Pixie had a new baby as well, a boy they had named Skipper Lee. So 3 little kids, big kids,
15 other
adults.
adults.
I mean, what this in a little 2-bedroom camper trailer.
Wow.
While they're living in this campground, Ed began forcing his children to participate in paramilitary drills and training. He was driving to Ohio every couple of weeks to pick up his checks from a post office box. Gotta go get the checks. Gotta cash those checks. So all this is happening. They're missing. There's, warrants. They're wanted in family court. It's just kind of a big mess, right? And one day, out of the blue, Eddie Jr. shows up at social services saying that his father had stolen money from him. Eddie Jr. had given Ed $7,500 so he could bond out of jail after the standoff. Ed had stolen the money and went on the run.
No.
Eddie Jr. was really angry about this money, and he was ready to talk. He divulged more information about the physical abuse in the Sexton home. Eddie Jr. told authorities that Sherry's son did belong to their father, as did Pixie's children. He also said Pixie had been in contact with their father and knew his whereabouts. Eddie Jr. said Ed had been talking to the kids while they were in foster care, violating this no contact order, and that he had urged the kids to run away so they could join the family when they left town.
Right. Meet me on the reservation. Okay.
Lana had also told authorities that she had been molested by her brother Charles at this point. She said Charles made her play, quote, the Statue of Liberty game, which was some type of sex abuse game. I don't know what that means.
Is that where a foreign country delivers you as a present to another country?
Sure. She had to hold his torch. I don't really know, Dylan. So her brother's been making her play this game, which is some sort of sex abuse.
I don't even want to fucking know.
I don't know. Some sort of sex abuse game. And she was really worried that her sister Kimberly was around her brother.
Right.
So she's letting the authorities know this. And Lana also said that when May had learned that Charles had been sexually abusing her, that May had severely beaten Charles. Lana also disclosed, along with Michelle, that their father had made them participate in a mock marriage ceremony. The 3 girls, Michelle, Kimberly, and Lana, were made to wear veils and these sort of sheer white skirts and participate in a wedding. The ceremony seemed to be a prelude to raping the girls because afterwards they were taken into the bedroom for the honeymoon with mom and dad.
Jesus.
Michelle also said she was forced to sign a contract in her blood stating she would go to hell if she disobeyed her father. James, who was still in foster care, confirmed Lana's story about this marriage and admitted that he had witnessed Charles abusing Lana in playing the Statue of Liberty game. He also told again that Charles had not only molested him, but his brother Christopher. Social services returned to family court with this new information, and Ohio issued arrest warrants, but the case had low priority. Due to the nature of the claims, it was not well publicized to protect the anonymity of these minor victims.
Right.
So even though Ed and May are wanted, it's not in the news, it's not in the media. So how are people supposed to know they're wanted?
Right. They're not really advertising the crimes or anything.
And no one could locate the Sexton family at all because they just up and gone. And Dylan, that is where we're going to end part 1.
I gotta go. You know what? I've never looked forward to a break in a story so much as I did this one.
It's a lot.
I don't even know what to say.
It's really hard to wrap your head around it. And the thing is, Dylan, this is only part 1. Part 2 is a whole nother set of crazy.
A whole nother can of crazy.
There's so much to this story.
Damn. This is one of the craziest things I've ever heard.
These people are monsters. Ed and May are fucking degenerates.
And these poor kids, they're so messed up with all this abuse and then turn into abusers. Some of them have turned into abusers, which we all know can happen. And it's really sad. And at the same time, really fucked up, you know. But this man should be put to death for what he's done to this family.
He's a damn demon.
I mean, he really is. If there's evil incarnate as a person, this guy's it. To be able to do this to your own flesh and blood, it's insane.
Well, it's just multiple traumas. I mean, he's like assaulting them at all,
right?
Like in all the ways.
Yeah.
Physically, sexually, mentally. I mean, even like making them participate in these weird, like satanic rituals and signing contracts in blood.
And making them think that you have this supernatural powers.
That you're going to be
stuff.
able to track them down and kill them if they, run off. I mean, it's just, what?
All the kids have night terrors and nightmares and all this stuff.
They're all scared to death.
And we've talked about before, if you're raised in this environment, and this, you see a lot of times children who grow up in cults, their parents are participants, willing participants. And I was watching one recently. It was about some guru. There's been a lot of those, that whole movement during the 60s and 70s. It's like any man from India could come over here and just say whatever, and people believe that, he's tapping into some ancient, ways of the yogis from thousands of years ago, and they're really just making it up as they go. And it's almost like they use your own predispositions or prejudices against you. Like you assume that a man from India is, a yogi and all this whatever. But the woman said, we were willing participants. We chose to follow this man, but our children were not. And they were raised in this environment, and that's way worse. And I agree with her, because the kids don't know that this is abnormal. When you're raised, when both your parents are participants, and May, she's a victim too, but she's also an abuser. And she should be held to account for her part she's played in this. And you don't even realize how crazy and out of control and weird your life and environment is, because that's how it's always been to you.
Yeah, Michelle would say that, the only luxury they had was watching television. And that was the only way that she had any kind of idea of the outside world. And that through television, she was able to realize or understand that her family what was happening was not normal and
Right.
not okay.
Yeah.
She would watch television families and think, gosh, I wish I had that kind of loving household. And that it was that kind of thing that made her realize that none of this is okay. Like the rest of the kids seemed to kind of just go along with it, but Michelle always knew this isn't right.
That's so sad. I mean, it's like she's living in North Korea or something.
Well, imagine never leaving your house, never getting to go anywhere. You're 18, you've never eaten in a restaurant.
Being excited to go to
Just on a ride.
Yeah, and
in
then
a
get
car.
raped by your dad. So instead of even getting a ride.
Like,
I mean, it's
like even getting to go to a gas station was like a big deal.
that's
It's
crazy.
the only place you ever get to go is school.
Phew. Okay. So thanks again to Rachel for sponsoring this really crazy episode of Mountain Murders over there on the Patreons. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks to all of our patrons and all our listeners. And we know this has been a tough one to listen to.
I'm spent.
But
Even just talking about it, it's
yeah.
like my brain is so melted right now.
Well, I know you've been up against the wall all week, just dealing with the severity and the scope of this.
Yeah, you and I've had multiple conversations, like while I've been researching this case, of me just saying, like, should we even talk about this?
Right.
It's so fucked, and there's so much I've left out because I really don't.
What?
Yeah. Trust. I had to deeply edit what we even discussed on the pod.
My
because
God.
it's so fucked up and deranged, and like I don't even want to talk about some of this stuff. So even the shit I've shared with you, which is fucked, is way sanitized compared to what's out there about what really happened and the detail. I mean,
Well, me and the listeners will trust your judgment on that. All right, so we're going to go put our brains on ice, and I'm going to watch like an old Disney movie that makes me happy. You know.
you know what I'm in the mood to watch?
What?
Madagascar.
Okay. We got 1 and 2 on the Disneys right there. We can watch both of them
Can we?
back to back.
I want to see it.
All right, so until next week, we'll catch you again in the Mountain Murder sometime this week episode between now and next week. And gosh, I don't even want to.
Everybody go hug a kitten,
Yeah.
a child,
Right. I'm not going to watch true crime tonight.
your parents for not being Ed and May Sexton.
Yeah, I mean, you're rolling the dice being born into this world, right? You could
It's
end up
true.
with monsters like this for parents.
It's terrible.
All right, until next week, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.